Good morning. I'd like to welcome, I'm Greg Bazar, Assistant Program Leader with Ag and Natural Resources. I'd like to welcome everyone here today to our seminar, and I'm extremely pleased to be able to introduce Dr. Keith Johnson. Keith, you know, I look back, Keith was an individual that was here, and I'm not saying this to make you old, Keith, or feel old, I guess, but was one of the few extension specialists that are still here during my career. So out in the counties, I know he helps all of our educators, helps so much for the animal industry and forage industry in the state of Indiana, and has just a tremendous amount of information that he's shared with our clientele. So Keith, without further ado, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you for your attendance today, and I hope there's some things that I mentioned today that will strike a chord with you, and look forward to any questions that you may have as we go along. And I just really appreciate the opportunity, Greg, for being here and sharing with those that have an interest about my experiences as a forage extension specialist. This journey of mine began 41 years ago, 6 months, 20 days, or something like that. But who's counting, right? Who's counting? I haven't been bored with this job. I think that's one of the reasons I have stayed at Purdue University as long as I have as the extension forage specialist, is the fact that every day is a new day. So I came in August of 1976 and came from the state of Nebraska and studied at the university there animal science and agronomy. As it turns out, and I didn't know at that point in time what I would be doing, roughly a decade later, but it was a wise choice, because I think I understand animals a little bit better than probably the average forage person because of that experience, and what I learned in agronomy was very, very valuable as well. I came here being a teaching assistant initially with Dr. Jim Vorst, and my advisor from a research side was Dr. Victor Lechtenberg. They were my co-advisors in the master's program, and I learned very, very much through them. My work was in the discipline of renovating pastures to make them more productive. At that point in time, we had tall fescue, which I'll allude to a little bit later in this seminar, that was giving us some problems. We learned that the inclusion of legumes into that grass system particularly was quite helpful in terms of animal productivity. After that was completed in May of '76, I started to then finish my PhD, which I was starting at the last of my master's program. And that particular work dealt with tall fescue root length and some things that influences particularly related to fertility, particularly relating to cutting management and the influence that it had. So a lot of hard work at that point in time going underground. Not sure that I would make that my full career, but certainly was an important part of my development. So the PhD degree was received in May of 1981, and in early May of that same year I began my journey. I would like to share with you a video that I have done. This is one that was done a few years ago, but I think it's a good synopsis of why I am an extension forage specialist. Let me go over here and see if it works from this avenue. We hope. Hello, my name is Keith Johnson. I'm a professor of agronomy and the extension forage crop specialist for Purdue University. Today I'm at the Beef Education and Research Unit of Purdue University, and this is why I am an extension forage specialist. And I probably looked at extension because I really wanted to be close to the farm as much as possible, to work with producers, to work with agribusiness personnel was something that I really wanted to do. The reason that the Forage Field Guide was developed, I saw the success of the corn and soybean guide and thought there needed to be an equivalent that related to forage crops. It's an opportunity to bring things together in pictures, in tables, in figures that really describe best management practices for forages. I received a call from a shepherd many years ago, and he expressed concern that this very fine alfalfa hay that he had purchased was not being eaten by his sheep. And I said, Ron, send me a sample. I'd like to take a look at it. So he sent a representative sample, arrived in the box. I opened it up, I stuck my hand in and quickly withdrew it, and I looked down, and in that hay was a trace of Canada thistle, which is a plant. It's a prohibited noxious weed that has spines on it. And so I called Ron back and I said, Ron, there's a little bit of thistle in this hay. Check the mouths of your ewes, and sure enough, they were a little bit blistered. They found that it was so offensive, even though it was very high quality alfalfa, there was enough of that physical aspect of hurt, they weren't going to eat that high quality alfalfa. There's another part of this that's kind of interesting from the standpoint of forage quality. When you take a sample and send it to the laboratory, you get results back. And Canada thistle, if we were to have a pure stand of Canada thistle and a pure stand of alfalfa and sent two separate samples to the laboratory, they would come back with very similar numbers. So some of these aspects of forage quality is not just the chemical test, but it also is the use of senses, your eye, your touch, the smell aspect of all of this is important when you talk about forage quality. Some days I'm out in the field all the time working on research or doing field days. Other days I may be in the office dealing with emails, getting caught up in research activities for the next days coming on. And so it's a varied day. And I think that's what I really enjoy about being an extension specialist. So one of the things that I've learned is that change does happen. And so some things as I brainstormed about change in 40-some years are a few of the following. Believe it or not, when I first came to Purdue, I shared a line phone. It was between the ball with a hole in the wall. And there was an intercom. Keith Johnson, you have a phone call. Okay, they had to announce it because we were having a shared line between the two walls. So now we've gone from that and postal mail to cell phone, email, and we now text quite a bit. Paper extension publications, so many in storage that we needed new storage space, to now website-based delivery, apps, and I believe in social media. Although I'm not a heavier user, I'm the only one that has Snapface, believe it or not. The rack of slides. This one's been to every county in Indiana, I think, 4 or 5 times. Some may think it's a new kind of Frisbee. But remember the slides and getting hung up in the projector and oh my. Yeah, turning upside down, forgetting to put the lid. Oh my, oh my. Yeah. So we got the rack of slides and now we have PowerPoint. The punch cards to personal computers, the 2 PCs. Whole field management to within field management, the whole concept of being more precise about what we do. On the left are a pair of boots, scout by walking. Still really, really important, but now we're just starting to get into the whole concept of unmanned aerial vehicles, the UAVs, the drones. This happens to be a picture that Dr. Nielsen helped me with in capturing of a pasture, and in the middle you see, well, a pasture that had been grazed. And it's in need of being restored and rested, okay, in that rotational grazing program. And yes, change happens. It happens. And some of this change there isn't much that you can do about, but you live with it. I recently saw this statement, do not be afraid of change or chaos. Embrace it by being as fluid as possible. Extension, it's all about the people. I think you need to be responsive. You can't let emails lay idle. You've got to respond. You need to be respectful. You need to be a listener. And as you listen, it's amazing what you will learn from those that are asking the questions many times. Be proactive. Don't wait for the action, be part of the action. I would say to those of you out in the field, think about evaluating the needs of your local clientele. Develop programs. Be proactive. Get them happening. Get them started. Be a leader. But at the same time, you need to be a team player too. And be impactful. From the side of whether it's economic, social, or environmental, we need to be impactful. I'd like to share with you some of my greatest satisfactions that I've had over the course of some 40 years in the line of education first, and then we'll get into some research components. I really like being out in the field, and the picture on the left is with youth that are of the 4-H age, teenager types, and on the right they've grown to be 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years older. So I enjoy interacting with people in a field environment. The Forage Field Guide was a fantastic opportunity for me. I had to work with about a dozen different individuals in putting this 275 document together. It took a lot of time, it took a lot of coordination, but it was a lot of satisfaction as well, and now we're starting our 4th edition revision. This little storybook, Lou Jones, clerical person, Department of Agronomy, very skilled individual. She was quite an artist in her training and happened to be an asset to us as a clerical person. She developed storybooks. I gave her the content ideas. She developed the stories on her own. I did some editing. Phenomenal working with her in the development of that little storybook, probably about 30 years ago. The Indiana Master Cattleman Program, more recently, phenomenal in working with specialists and educators in the state of Indiana in putting this, what I would call a very high impact, low number of people each time, in the neighborhood on average over the course of the last 4 years, probably 15 to 20 in the class, but with high impact. And I think about the class that I teach in dealing with communicating with the public. This is a seminar class, and what we discuss is how do we communicate science in a way that the public understands. And this is a picture from the Indiana State Fair of projects that the students had in working in team, learning to work in a team, and they worked on exhibits that were right for the public to understand. And one of the great benefits of that to me is to meet graduate students that I otherwise wouldn't have known. This particular person that is here, Stephanie Griebel from the country of Germany. And I've had experiences with others from other countries because of that particular class that otherwise I wouldn't have really known maybe who they were, but not really what they're all about. The Indiana Forage Council, a not-for-profit organization of which I have been secretary for the 37 years that I have been here at Purdue. The thing that's neat about that organization, I have really met some fantastic producers and agricultural business people because of it. It's developed relationships with me that have lasted in some cases over the course of my whole career, and I continue to meet younger people that are dedicated to the forages of Indiana. Great satisfaction happened last fall. We assembled a forage bowl team. Essentially, it's a Jeopardy type game that went to the American Forage and Grassland Conference in early January. Thanks to Brooke Stefancic, the lady on the left, who is my graduate student, very capable graduate coach, put together the curriculum, and these 4 individuals that were in my class of forages, which I've been doing now for a decade, were juniors at the time they took that class, or seniors now. They represented Purdue University at the Forage Bowl and claimed second prize because of their hard work, and thanks for Brooke for her being a good coach with them. And lastly, working with the Pest and Plant Diagnostic Laboratory the last few summers with Brooke and Gail Rule and her colleagues in that particular lab has really been an outstanding experience for me. I've never taken a formal pathology class. Looking back, that's probably something I should have done. I still can do it, right? I can continue to learn. But I did continue to learn about pathology of switchgrass, and we just learned lots and lots of things in that particular project. As a matter of fact, I'm so impressed with what was accomplished, I'm going to show you a little bit of a video clip of what Brooke, Gail, and I accomplished. We'll start into
From the
this.
southernmost site to the northernmost site in terms of expectation of the climate,
Yeah.
even in the smaller state of Indiana.
Yeah.
Well, you know, as we've gone about doing this, Brooke, you and I are not trained pathologists.
No.
We've learned a lot of things along the way about pathology, and frankly, I think I'd maybe like to go back and take a course in pathology because I have found it very, very interesting.
Yeah.
But we've had to go to an individual that is trained as a pathologist. She is our CSI, our
That's
crop scene investigator. And she is the diagnostician at Purdue University. And she works in the plant and pest diagnostic laboratory and has been extremely helpful in this particular project, along with her cohorts in the lab. And this is Gail Rule. And Gail, we'd like to have you then interact with us in regards to what you have seen and what you have taught Brooke and I about all these different pathogens. But let's go back and look at the particular, sequence of events and when we've seen some of these pathogens, Brooke. So if you can kind of tell us when we started seeing some things in terms of the year and it's built upon one another, it seems like we're seeing more things as time has gone along.
Yeah. So in 2015, we saw Biniauskia, leaf rust, and we also saw bipolaris leaf spot. And then in 2016, in addition to those, we also saw the switchgrass mosaic virus for the first time. And then in 2017, in addition to everything we've seen in the previous 2 years, we added on anthracnose and...
Let's take you into the clip a little bit more
Alan
now.
and Mark Wyndham has done a lot of work on switchgrass.
Okay, very good. Well, another one that we have seen is the bipolaris leaf spot.
Yep.
And another interesting one. So when you go to the field, what do you see there?
Well, basically, as I'm walking through the field, I'll see some spots on leaves, and from a distance, they kind of look to me like a dark red or a purplish color. And so that gets me tuned in to look a little closer. And then as those lesions mature, they start to have these gray centers, which is, as Gail told me, where the fungal growth is starting to appear.
Yeah, very important to, I think, the visual diagnostic for sure, because it's pretty unique, actually, of things that I've seen in the field. And we brought samples to you, and you magnified and really able to confirm.
And the big thing with this is it notice up there that we incubate, and to have a disease, you have to have the proper environment, you have to have the host, and you have to have the pathogen. So by incubating, we put it into what we call a moist chamber to encourage the spores to grow, and then we can take those spores and look at them underneath the microscope. As you can see here, we can magnify by 600 times, and we can see the spore that's present and identify the disease.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You don't have the ability to look at 600 times, do you?
No.
You're pretty special, but
Yeah.
not 600 times, okay.
Okay, thank you. So, the thing that I found through that was team interaction, and you can learn something new every day. And through that whole process of 3 years of finding actually 2 new pathogens that had never been experienced in Indiana before through all of that. So it was a phenomenal experience working with the trained pathology and Brooke's interaction as part of her degree. In regards to research, I really have enjoyed, and this is the most recent, switchgrass as a bioenergy feedstock instead of just a feed for livestock. We're looking at this as a potential fuel resource for people. So this has been a good experience working with native warm season grasses such as switchgrass. Working with Brooke and working with graduate students, you know, they energize old guys like me. And I really enjoy her help as we've gone about doing things. I learned from my students through the course of time. What we're looking at in this particular slide here, and this has an education experience to it, but a plot at Trafalgar, Indiana is in the background at the FFA Leadership Center where she does her work. But we also developed at Rowan and at Trafalgar, Indiana on private lands a series of exhibits of 9 in number that one can take a walking experience. As you look at the grasses, you can learn about, you know, what switchgrass is about. You can learn about the potential of it as a fuel resource in the future. Rotational stocking. Some of us call that rotational grazing. So we were involved in early years with working with animal science at Purdue Ag Centers with rotational stocking as compared to continuous stocking. Potato leaf hopper resistance. I really did enjoy working with a group of individuals in the Midwest that were looking at the potential benefit of potato leaf hopper resistant alfalfa. This is that sap-sucking nymph, literally it does, injects its mouthpiece into alfalfa, causes it to stunt, turn yellow. Economic threshold needs to be evaluated by SweetNet and determine whether spray is not or not necessary. But in this particular case, we have a resistance mechanism, and it was really great for me to work with Professor Shade in entomology. He would come out and look at the plots, and he was an individual that was really one of the first of 2 research groups in the country that was developing this resistance, which means we don't have to apply as much insecticide now because we have leafhopper resistant alfalfas that are greater than 80% resistant to this particular pest. And it gets its resistance through these glandular hairs that we call trichomes. And there are people on campus that are looking at in a very basic way what the importance of these trichomes might be in various aspects of plant production. The tall fescue endophyte. Endophyte means within plant. It's not a pathogen per se, but it's a fungus within the plant at a cellular level that produces ergovaline alkaloids, which cause a whole lot of problems with livestock, such as poor reproduction. It looks at poor weight gain, poor milk production, which, by the way, the dairy farmers in the 1950s and 60s were the first to shun tall fescue with the endophyte because they were measuring milk production on a 2-time-a-day basis and they weren't getting as much milk with this grass. Elevated body temperature, prolonged gestation in horses, that gives foals of bigger size, that gives problems at birth. So a real problem, and we were involved in doing some of the work of comparison of low endophyte varieties that were developed, which produce low levels or no levels of ergovaline alkaloids, and looked at the response. In this particular case, we were using beef cattle as our measure. Annual forages as a double crop. John McMillan was a student of mine, now Dr. McMillan. He looked at several forages after winter wheat grain production and evaluated them, and we found some really good yield data, found some good quality data with about 8 different forages that we evaluated. And lastly, the brown midrib. This is a mutation that was discovered and was really perpetuated here initially at Purdue in the 1970s. It was the early 1990s that varieties or hybrids were released to the country, and what the brown midrib is and making it special is there's less lignin. It's more digestible, which means they eat more of it. The palatability is improved and weight gain is improved as well. If you look real closely in this picture, you'll see 3 ewes that are grazing, and what they're grazing is the brown midrib down to the ground. In the background is the non-mutated normal sorghum Sudan grass. Big response. On a day that I was traveling in the Purdue vehicle, National Public Radio must have been kind of boring because my mind started to wander. And so if you look really carefully in this picture, you will see a Purdue pea. So I went out with a drill. The pea is the normal sorghum Sudan grass. That about it, and in the whole of the pea was brown midrib. And we let sheep create the pea. So this is an imagery from aircraft, red imagery showing us the differences of crop vitality, if you will, or the presence of the crop. But It took them about 5 days to get to the middle of that pea, but they found it, they consumed it, and they walked out and left the other. Communication is critical, just really, really critical in this role of being an extension specialist. And I want to share with you very quickly about 15 things that I think are just really, really important. First of all, know your audience. And I've got that one in red and several times in italicized. Sticks and stones can break your bones, but words will never hurt me. You've heard that before, haven't you? Words do hurt. You got to be careful. Your message may be exactly the same for a highly trained PhD and an 8th grader. If your information that you have to share is really novel to both, you probably are saying the same words. How you say the words does make a difference. I recall speaking to my mother, and I had a little play with her on this. I stated, let's see if I can recall, Nebraska is a good place to be from. Or you can say, Nebraska, a good place to be from. Same words, but the way you say them can be interpreted. And she interpreted my words in a little negative way, which, by the way, Nebraska was a great place to be from. Progress and understanding require compromise. Don't dig in your heels that nothing gets accomplished. You've got to compromise. The customer can be right, but they are not always right. I have had only one time in my conversations on the telephone with an individual hanging up on me. He wanted me to validate his conclusions, and I suggested that his conclusions were not correct. So the customer, well, we want to think they're right, but they're not always right, and we're there to help guide. Avoid slang. It may be misunderstood. As an example, this graduate level course that I had a young lady from the country of Argentina in it. And I got curious about this whole slang thing, and I said, do you know, Leah, what it means as the crow flies? Well, she didn't know what the as the crow flies, right? I think most of us probably do. 2 points, shortest distance of travel as the crow flies. But you got to understand who you're speaking with. Will they understand the slang that we use? Accept the potential consequences of your words and your emails and your texts. They may come back to be a haunt. So think before you speak, text, email. Learning objectives are critical in helping educator and students. You're at a basis of understanding. Every examination, every quiz that I give in the classroom, I have learning objectives. So they know where I'm coming from, and shame on me if I don't create an exam or a quiz that are based on the learning objectives. Do you really know what you are saying? Do you really know what you're saying? Nonverbal communication does communicate, okay? Didn't say a word, but I communicated, right? The answer may not be as simple as you think. So I recall having a call. Somebody wanted me to respond that you apply such and such herbicide to take care of foxtail and alfalfa. Something didn't seem quite right about that whole concept of why that particular stand of alfalfa was so weedy in July. So instead of taking 30 seconds to answer his question and say apply, post, or select herbicide to get rid of the foxtail, we started talking about, well, is your alfalfa potato leaf hopper resistant? Because many times it'll be weedier when it's not. No spraying's been done. So I said, how many times are you cutting this? 5 times a season, and it's been that way for 3 years. Well, that alfalfa was tired. Too many times in a season for too many years, and weeds were encroaching. So it was the cutting management. But it took me about 4 minutes instead of a 30-second response. Speak the truth always. Spoken words without visual aids require more description to be effective. So I like to use props. And this is one that can be quite effective in terms of a demonstration. We made some alfalfa silage. One-way valve. Doesn't allow air in, so we've got good fermentation, allows the carbon dioxide to escape. So in our training that we did at the Diagnostic Training Center, we made a series of these. Too wet, too dry, too loose, well packed. And we left the one-way valve out entirely. What a moldy mess. Okay? So after a month of doing this, and this was done a year and a half ago, and it's still very high quality, and we've got the counterpart that would be a moldy mess comparison. So visual aids can really help in terms of learning. On-hands learning is certainly better than what my children call the classroom of death by PowerPoint. And storytelling is effective. I've learned that telling real stories, and the longer you go about in your job, you have more stories to tell. But remember those stories, because if they tell a story to the next generation or to whom you're speaking with, they can be very, very impactful. Let me tell you one. So I was called out to southern Tippecanoe County about a decade ago. I met a young man. His seedsman was there too. I didn't expect to see the seedsman. Well, I knew what I was coming out for. It was because it was a stand of alfalfa or a seeding of alfalfa that did not get established. And so here we are, early April, bare ground, brown, no green alfalfa. Should have been at that point in time, you know, there should have been some growth of what had been seeded the previous year. So something at that moment told me what you see at 5'10" is not necessarily what might be the answer. So I got down on my hands and my knees. And my nose, my pug nose, got close, real close. And what I saw was alfalfa, thick stand that was about 1/2 inch tall, as brown as the soil that it was planted into. So I asked the question of the young man, when did you seed this? And he said, October the 7th. Well, that may not mean to many of you in the audience, but it does to me that alfalfa should have been sown in the month of August. 6 weeks, 8 weeks earlier. It didn't have time to grow up to know that it was supposed to be a perennial, and it winter killed. So that got my whole process thinking, particularly with the seedsman there. And we talk a little bit uncarefully sometimes. And what happens in the forage world is we talk about fall seeding. Fall seeding. And I thought, here's a young 20-something that's never done this before, and if he were learning from the professional that you seed this in the fall, October the 7th is a beautiful fall day. Good day to seed alfalfa, isn't it? So we need to be very, very careful in how we communicate, because those that haven't done it before may take you literal. They may do it because as you do it, but it wasn't quite correct. So I think storytelling can be very, very effective. Your words should be taken literally. Okay, so that's the be careful. And I think my story kind of suggests that. So many times I think we have to ask, what does the clientele really want? Do they want to know what time it is? It's 12:04? Or do they want to know how that clock really works with all the mechanisms that, you know, and I couldn't even begin to tell you how a clock works. But the point is, do they want a quick answer or do they want the lengthy answer? Email response after email response after email response to answer an initial question is very inefficient. I would rather, and I do, I'll get on the telephone because there's throwback of questions that I prefer to get on with it, get to the answer instead of this whole bantering back and forth of 20 emails to get to the initial question's answer. The way to complete a task may be the same, but the time to reach the destination may be different for different people. Particularly, I've noticed this with monetary resource. Some people that have a lot of cash can take your ideas and flow pretty quickly and do some miraculous things in a year. There are others that may take 5 years. But you start with being wise about what dollars you spend first that's going to get you along the way in the correct way. So I think it's important to understand that the destination time could be different for different clientele. And again in red and in italics, this I know. Working with those trained in communication can make you a better communicator. I really appreciate those in the Ag Communication Service that I have worked with in the past. The people at the exhibit center, the people that do the editing of documents. Oh my, the first one I got back, it probably took 3 ink pens. But you know, the thing I learned as a young person, and I continue to learn, is that those that are trained in communication make something that was pretty good, you know, but they made it great because of their expertise. So extension, it's all about dependability, versatility, and what's inside. Are we like a Maytag? So I'm going to play this clip, and when you hear the word Maytag, in your mind insert the word extension.
Congratulations, it's Maytag. When you bring a Maytag appliance into your home, there's a little something extra inside. Tough, hard-working American dependability. So go ahead and load up these racks with family meals. Hand over all the dishes and pans, even the filthy ones. Because dependability means giving your stains a kick in the pants. So even when cornflakes dry into cement flakes. And when fishing trips go way better than expected, you can depend on Maytag to roll up its sleeves and clean up these sleeves. And use a little elbow grease to cut through this grease. Because dependability is what Maytag does. Maytag. What's inside matters.
Let me go back here. So are we like the Maytag? I kind of think maybe extension is. I think sometimes we learn to multitask. We clean the dishes, we wash the clothes, we refrigerate, we cook, we do lots of things. And I think we need to learn to be dependable. And yes, I don't have any stock as far as I know in Maytag or have a favorite relative that works there, but I found that to be kind of an interesting little clip that we do need to learn to be dependable. We've all learned about the elevator speech. And I'll call this one my skyscraper or slow elevator, because it's going to be more than a 30-second rendition here. But I'm really proud about this little storybook. I actually begin my graduate level forages class with this. This is my elevator speech of why forages are important. Again, this book was developed with the help of a clerical person in agronomy. And then we took it the next level about a decade later. I worked with a student group in computer graphic technology, which again was an interesting thing for me to do. And oh, by the way, there's other stories, one that deals with a soil particle and one a water drop, and one with a bacterium that have been developed too. And with the use of computer graphics technology students, we brought the little storybook to life. So this is our story about Freddie's friends, and it's my skyscraper elevator speech.
Freddie's grandma was baking cookies. "Freddie, why don't you go out and visit the animals in the pasture?" she said. "The cookies will be done when you come back." Out he ran. "What are you eating, cow?" asked Freddie. "Hay. It's good for me and helps make lots of milk. Hay is a forage grown and dried for animals to eat. Do you like milk?" "Sure. I like milk with my cookies," Freddie said. Other cattle were far out in the pasture. They were eating too. Good forage makes strong muscles and healthy animals. They eat forage because it's good for them. "What is a forage?" asked Freddie. "Glad you asked. Forages are plants like alfalfa, clover, and grasses. They make good feed for cows, horses, and sheep. I eat forage too. It makes my wool coat grow thick and long. The sweater you are wearing was made from my wool," said the sheep. "Oh, this is my favorite sweater. It is nice and warm." Freddie said goodbye to the cow and the sheep and ran across the pasture to see the big horse. "Hey, Freddie," said the horse. "This good grass makes me feel strong. Do you want to climb on my back and go for a ride?" Of course Freddie wanted to go. Up on the horse's back, Freddie could see far and wide as they trotted along. Forages make good places for wild birds and rabbits to make nests and to stay warm during the winter. Forages are not just used for food. That's Farmer Tucker's farm over there. He plants forage crops to keep the soil loose and good for growing other crops like corn and wheat. Farmer Tucker also plants forage crops to keep soil from being washed or blown away on slopes and hills. The roots go deep into the soil and help to hold the soil in place, said the horse. The horse stopped for a drink at a nearby creek. As Freddie bent down to look into the water, a fish gurgled to the top. "Hi, kid. I'm sure glad Farmer Tucker plants grasses on the stream banks. It helps keep my water clean by holding the soil in place on the stream bank," said the fish. The horse took Freddie to a fence. They looked at the road below. "Highway workers are planting grass on the hill slopes and hillsides along the highway. This will keep the soil from washing onto the road." "You learn fast, but did you know that different forage plants are grown in different parts of the country?" said the horse. "Some plants can live in cold weather, and some prefer hot." Freddie waved at the sheep and the cow as they started back home. Forages are friends of people, animals, and wildlife. They provide protection from the weather for some, food for others, and keep the soil in place. "Can I come visit you again?" asked Freddie. "Sure, Freddie, anytime," replied the horse. Freddie hurried into the house to tell Grandma what he had learned from his farm friends. And of course he had some freshly baked cookies with milk.
Well, that's the story about Freddie. And animating it kind of brought the story to life. They're part of our website, and the other stories are a part of that too. If you have interest in a particle of soil or a water droplet, or how bacteria aren't necessarily all bad guys. So working with computer graphics was students was a real enlightening thing for me on several of these projects. I'd just like to close and say, remember, change is going to happen. Remember Green's statement, don't be afraid of chaos. Don't be afraid of change. Embrace it by being as fluid as possible. And another one that deals with change is the following. Behold the turtle. He makes progress only when he sticks his neck out. So with that, I'll take any questions you might have We look forward to those, but forages are quite versatile. Forages are healthy soil. They were cool in that regard before cover crops became cool. Feed for livestock. And I really do believe, truly in my heart, believe that someday there will be fuel for people from forages. So thank you very much. Any questions? Yes, Peter.
More of a comment than a question. Okay, more of a comment than a question, Keith. You never mentioned the use of humor to get your message across, but you demonstrated it pretty well in your presentations. I appreciated that.
The thing you need, yeah, and the question was regarding the use of humor. And I think how often you use it, you need to be somewhat careful in the kind of humor that you project. But I think you also need to understand and look at your clientele. If things are getting a little slow with them in terms of you need to change wheels somehow. And this may be injecting a video clip. It may be taking a break from the usual classroom experience and let them essentially be educating one another in terms of small groups or presentations. Or it may be an interjection of the right kind of humor that hopefully, portrays a message that you're trying to give so that you create something that's maybe a bit more memorable. So yes, I think humor is a skill that used correctly can be quite useful. Any other questions or comments?
Keith,
Yes.
in the next 10 years, are there going to be more forages, state of Indiana, or less? What would you think?
So the question Greg asked, if you couldn't really hear, is the future acreage or the amount of forages in the state. I will tell you that for sure that when grain prices were half again as much as they are now, or double, that the amount of questions that I had from clientele declined tremendously because there was a lot of pasture acreage, there's a lot of hay acreage that went to the opportunity of garnering more income. Once you leave, it's hard, if you haven't been trained in that particular area, to bring it back. But I do see, I think, some really strong interest in the beef cattle side of things, for sure. One of the changes that has happened that wasn't there at the beginning of my career at all was this whole concept of a direct marketing your own beef to individuals that are out in the public. We're seeing more and more of that. Some people have learned to be successful with grass-fed. It takes a real skill and a real understanding of beef cattle nutrition and management to be effective at that, as well as the skill of marketing, but we're seeing more and more interest in that sort of concept of forages as the basis for food production. So if I do, it's going to be slow but sure. I will tell you that there are many cash crop hay producers that are still doing quite well because there's not as many doing it, frankly. But as a result, prices remain strong, and so there's opportunity. I really do believe that the other thing that we've noticed is with small acreage that people can't justify the whole lineup of equipment to harvest hay, and there's more and more use of contractual help. And I think there's an opportunity, probably part-time during the summer, to be really good at helping the small acreage people be more timely with the harvest of their crops and so forth. Probably not a full-time, make a living at it, but somebody that's trained and likes machinery, likes forages, I think there's opportunity to helping small acreage people. So, time will tell. I really do believe in the future. I really believe that when fuel prices explode again in terms of, we were just really set up with the start of a couple of plants that were taking corn residues in the state of Iowa. And they've kind of laid low because, fossil fuel prices have remained relatively small. But if you think about the state of Indiana and where we were 20 years ago in ethanol production from grain. What was there, 1 in the state of Indiana? How many do we have now? Yeah, think about that. It's not hard to travel and see these plants, is it? And I think we're kind of at the starting edge if we ever have an explosion of high fuel prices again. Those plants in Iowa will become productive, and it'll start the whole aspect of learning from them, from creating, things that are very high in fiber into fuel for people. And that won't be done on marginal land. Or it will be done on marginal land. It won't be on prime corn, soybean land. It'll be done on land that's currently like in Conservation Reserve Program. Yeah, Suzanne.
Keith, have you seen changes in the kinds of challenges you have or that farmers have with forage crops with changes in the weather, with climate changes, and what do you see in the future likely as a result of expected climate change?
Regarding climate change, it's always been difficult in this state to get hay made in timely fashion because of weather events. But I would agree that I think it has become a bit more challenging even in the last decade or so. In terms of response to that, one of the things, if you think about, again, taking the drives in Indiana, a lot of you are seeing large marshmallows, wrapped hay bales. Okay, essentially what they're doing is making a fermented silage product by wrapping that, excluding air. That's one of the tools in the toolkit that can be used and has been used with what we've experienced in making dry hay, which takes in the neighborhood of about 3 days to get that accomplished, whereas if you're making the large marshmallows or inline tube and being wrapped, the amount of time to do that may be as little as a day or a day and a half. So that's kind of a bit of a weather beater in terms of systems coming through, and we can use that as a potential source. The other thing that's happened, this whole rotational grazing event has allowed opportunities for less use of hay, which allows more income to be retained by the farmer, because through that we can begin grazing earlier in the spring, and we can begin grazing or graze later into the fall, even into the early winter. And so that reduces the amount of hay that needs to be fed. Now, whether that's in relation to climate change, probably not, but economic incentive of less hay, high cost, let the animal graze. And that's through rotational stocking. Yes?
Keith, thanks so much for sharing some of your thoughts and ideas about extension. One of the things that you've had a great reputation of doing is sharing very well with county-based extension educators, and you've worked hard to cultivate those relationships. What kind of advice would you have for young extension specialists going forward to sort of cultivate those relationships with county educators?
So the relationship between extension specialists and educators, I think really opportunities of training and taking time to make sure we have real quality time and take the time to do that, get to know individuals that you work with as closely and possibly as you can. I valued that very much as a young extension specialist. In the early years, we had opportunities of being together as specialists and as educators for a number of days together, and actually went on farm visits and did some evaluations and came back as teams and worked with one another on such things. And so people of my age were there, and then young people, in their late 20s were there, young extension educators, older extension educators, an opportunity of sharing. Don't be bashful. I would say don't be bashful, learn one another, learn the skill sets of those that you're around particularly, and I think this is fairly effectively done because we have very good trained people in particular disciplines as extension educators, use them as resources in those particular areas. So learn the skill set of people that are around you to answer questions. And I think most of all, really, to encourage somebody to be a part of this, you have to understand it really is all about the people you are serving. You have to be a people person and want to, deliver programming and advice that can be very impactful. So it's been a good career for me. I'm looking forward to the next 40 years, 6 months, and 20 days. Because I haven't been bored.
Keith, more of a comment, I think, too. I do appreciate, and you had it on your list of getting back on emails and phone calls in a timely manner, because out in the county, you get to figure out which one of those educators or specialists get back with you quickly, and you use those specialists more frequently. There's a few that it's just hard to hear back from, and you kind of forget those back on the back burner when you need a question answered, because they're not going to get back with you in a timely manner. So I always appreciate those specialists that do get back with us in a timely manner and with appropriate information we need.
Well, I think it's important that you treat people like you want to be treated. I think that's really critical that you do that and keep that in mind. If I were in that individual's shoes, what would I do? And how would I respond and how would I react? I think that's really, really important. Yes. Any other comments, questions? Well, again, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I appreciated the challenge of looking back. It really created some memories for me as we did this, and again, I'm looking forward to the next 40 years.